I think we can go ahead and get going. It's a little after 9:30. So welcome everybody to today's session. I see that many of you have already introduced yourselves in the chat box, so thank you so much. Please keep doing that. I know there are some folks who are joining us from their office, so especially if you have multiple people coming in from one Zoom account, please do mention everyone's names in the chat box so that we can make sure to get all of the participants who are registered. It's so great that we have a big group here today and that this virtual format has allowed partners and directors and many of us employees to join this session who maybe wouldn't have been able to do so in a physical setting. So while not necessarily ideal, there is a silver lining to the situation. So warm welcome to everybody here. My name is Tabea Zimmerman, and I am a conservation specialist at Colonial District based in Williamsburg. And Chris Van Vlack and myself have been co-chairing a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee out of the Employees Association. And this group has been working since March of this year on various projects, and one of them has been doing the planning and organizing of today's session. So we're very happy that you all could join us for this event. One other sort of project that we've been working on, and many of you have probably seen it, it was shared yesterday, was a statement of solidarity and support, encouraging districts to pursue looking into diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of the work that districts are doing. So check that out if you haven't already seen it, and hopefully that, along with today's conversations, will lead to more great discussion today and beyond. So with that introduction, wanting to let you all know sort of how things got started with today, and just wanting to go over a few housekeeping rules or guidelines before we get going. And I apologize for the background noise coming from my home today. But if you are able and willing to turn your video on, please do so. This is a session that will have a lot of conversation and engagement, so we want to try to mimic an in-person situation as much as possible. So if you're willing and it's appropriate in the space that you're in, we encourage you to do so. And everyone was on mute when you entered the session, so please keep it that way to keep the noise levels down until the Q&A sessions or when we're engaging in discussion, and then you can unmute yourself for that. Most of our Zoom screen names are already on our personal names, but if you are logging in from a district account or a Gmail address or something else that isn't your name, if you could please rename yourself, and you can do that by scrolling down to the bottom of the screen and clicking on the button that says participants. And then most likely you will be the first participant that shows up. And if you roll over to a blue button that says more, and then click on rename, and you can enter your first and last name there so that we can have these virtual name tags that we know who we're speaking to. Most of us have already been communicating with each other in the chat box, so please feel free to keep doing so. Post your questions and your comments there. Chris and myself will be keeping track of those questions and pulling them together. There will be several times throughout today's session that are specifically for Q&A. So we're going to try to answer and address whatever questions and comments folks have during those times, so that during the session we can try to stay focused on the speaker and on the content. So feel free to engage with each other, but we really want to focus on the content. So as much as possible, refrain from going off on side conversations. Know that there are 3 breaks built into the session. So we will put those up on the screen and inform everyone, and we can all walk up, get up and walk around and do whatever we need to do. However, if at any point you need to take a break, please don't hesitate, feel free to do so. If you'd like, you can turn your video off and step away, and then join us whenever you're able to. Today's presentations are being recorded. It's recording right now. But there will be breakout sessions with smaller groups where we'll have a chance to engage with each other and share some personal stories and experiences, and those will not be recorded. We really want everyone to feel comfortable sharing with each other in those smaller settings. So know that those portions of today's session will be confidential and just with the folks who are in your breakout. But we did want to record the larger presentation so that folks who aren't able to join us today can still have access to this wonderful session. There will be follow-up opportunities to engage with both Pastor Guy, today's facilitator, who is available for any comments and questions that folks may have afterwards, and also with the committee members of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We're looking at putting out a survey for follow-up evaluation and feedback from today's participants, and also folks are interested potentially sort of a 2.0 discussion conversation for us to engage with each other and yeah, take this information and directly apply it to our district work. Last and probably most importantly is to listen, engage, and lean into discomfort. So today we're going to be discussing some serious topics, and some things may make us uncomfortable. And actually, if Pastor Guy is doing his job right, we should be uncomfortable at some point during today's session. So when that happens, remember that even if we're feeling emotional or mental discomfort, we're all in physical safety. We're not in danger. Our bodies are not in danger. So, you know, when I'm feeling uncomfortable, it could be helpful to remember that and to try to sit with that discomfort. But if we do need to take a break, you know, please do so, and then come back and re-engage and join us again, because these are important conversations and we want everyone to be here. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to my co-chair, Chris Van Vlock, to introduce today's speaker.
Great. Thank you, Tabea. And I really want to thank everyone for coming today. When we sort of had the kernel of the idea about starting this committee, you know, sessions like this really were part of the goal. So thank you all for attending. And I just want to take a minute to introduce my friend, Pastor Guy Johnson, who I've known, gosh, going on probably 15 years, 14 years now. Guy has experience with both soil and water districts as well as extension. So he's very familiar with the world that we come from. As part of his work with Loudoun County Extension Office, Guy also led up the financial literacy program that was given to the high schools in Loudoun called Reality Store. So he's used to dealing with unruly large groups of people. So if you think you're going to pull a fast one on him, he is going to catch you, just like he did with the high school students during Reality Store. After moving on from the district, Guy became Pastor Guy and attended theological seminary, Lancaster Theological Seminary, and since then has been pastoring a number of churches. So once again, he's also used to handling unruly groups in churches. So with that, Guy has his bona fides for conducting this training. He's familiar with us, and many of you probably have met Guy at some of the trainings in the past. So with that, I will turn it over to Pastor Guy Johnson.
Well, good morning. I always get nervous when Chris starts to talk about me because, like you said, I've known Chris for almost 15 years, and there's something about somebody who works upstairs from you and comes down and harasses you about your musical choices. I'm so glad he did not mention one of my favorite songs. He will get me somewhere along the way. Chris, let me publicly thank you for not just being good at what you do, but thank you for being my friend. You claimed me publicly as your friend, and not everybody is willing or able to do that, but you were. I am honored to call you friend. You know you have a seat at my dinner table at any time, except today because I'm not cooking. But for the most part, thank you, thank you, thank you. So with that, let's get into it. Let's have this conversation. It's going to be a little uncomfortable at times. So let's go over some ground rules and some group norms. Okay, number one. this is a conversation. I get to be the facilitator. All that means is I'm going to guide you all in what we're going to do today. This is not about finger pointing or personal judgment. I'm going to say some stuff and it's going to make you uncomfortable. This is really only about our society and our institutions and how we interact with them and how their culpability does sometimes, how our culpability in that sometimes leads to issues around these topics. Can you excuse me for just a moment? So I'm going to, before this started, one of my closest friends is a second grade teacher, and she had to use her second grade teacher voice on her dog, and it worked. Excuse me, Poppins, Poppy is working. You have to go. Goodbye. I love you. And those of you who know me outside of Soil and Water know that Poppins is the absolute joy of my life. He is also quite bossy. So understand that I am a real person. I'm working from home and my dog doesn't understand boundaries. So he's going to pop up as he just did and he's going to interrupt. So John, please just bear with us. And he's actually very good. Here's a treat, go away. You don't take the treat, go away. All right, please remain civil. That's very important because this is a very, very difficult subject to discuss. In doing this work, I've worked with lots and lots of people who do this work a lot better than I do. And the late Katie Geneva Cannon, who was the first African-American woman ordained in the Presbyterian Church, was working on a book with 5 other women, and it was very, very difficult work. And they would get mad at each other, and they, I'm leaving, and they slam and walk out. You gotta come back. You always have to come back. If you need to take a break, take a break. But I need everybody's perspective and participation. No voice is more important than any other voice, but I need to hear all voices, okay? And finally, don't monopolize the conversation. Now, I say that because, as Chris indicated, and I'm going to show you in a minute, I pastor churches. And what happens is people decide that they want to talk and 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 talk. But everybody has something to say. So if you have, if you have something to say and you think it's that important that you just got to go on and on and on and on, write it down and we can discuss it offline. But I only have 180 minutes. At this point, I only have 64 minutes to do this work. So let's get into it. So who am I? So just so you know, I was being interviewed for a local news station in central Pennsylvania. So, and I love that picture. I am an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ. I was ordained in 2017. I am a certified diversity trainer as of 2018. I was an employee with the Soil and Water Conservation District in Loudoun County right after seminary. Before seminary, as Chris indicated, I worked for Loudoun Cooperative Extension, and I am very honored that the program that I helped manage and develop is now being used throughout the entire Commonwealth in high schools for financial literacy. I was also a trainer in the Maryland Department of Human Resources, Family Investment Administration. All that means is I worked in the welfare office and I gave out food stamps, but I also helped write the federal policy for some of the changes that were made after 2005. So I've been doing this kind of work for a long time. So I kind of know what I'm talking about. What's not indicated on this Who Am I is as I indicated, my coworker and my office mate is a 22-pound ball of fur named Poppins. And my husband, God bless him, just retired after 47 years of being an educator, both in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, as well as Loudoun County Public Schools. So he is downstairs and not controlling our kid like I asked him to, but it is what it is. So that's who I am. I am a real person. This is what real life looks like. And this is part of the diversity conversation that you have, because everybody's home life and everybody's personal life doesn't look the same. And we have to think about how we bring that into the workplace. All right, so let's get started with a couple questions. First question. Do you think we talk too much about diversity, equity, and inclusion? That should be a poll. So everybody go. And the world went quiet. All right. How we doing? How are we doing? That's not, that's me. Okay. Okay. 83. So 5 out of 6 people say that we don't talk enough about it, and that last 6 says we do. That's a good way to start. Second question. How long have you been an employee of the organization? It's a poll, go. Did you raise your hand? Then you can't participate. How we doing? Okay. I need one of the co-hosts to record this for me really quickly. It's going to be very important in about 2 minutes. Okay? You got it? Anybody?
Got it.
Good. All right. So 32% of people in this room today have been an employee. 1/3 of you have been an employee for 15 years or more. That's going to be very important in a few minutes. Third question. I routinely see people who don't look like me, whether it be by race, by gender, by religion, or any other thing that you can quantify in the office. Go. How are we doing? Okay. It's almost split. Okay. That's interesting. That's going to be important in a few minutes as well. So the overarching question for all of this is, why this, why now? And when I went to the Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District webpage, this is what I saw. Now, if you can see it, when I look at this picture, I don't see anybody who looks like me. Nowhere. And as someone who is a minority, who is interested in environmental issues, if I go to some place that is supposedly invested in environmental issues and I don't see anybody that looks like me anywhere on your front page, I'm going to get a little nervous. And I'm going to wonder, if I come to your organization, are you going to be able to help me? So as you all know, I work in Loudoun County. I worked in agriculture/environmental sciences for about 7 years, 6.5, 7 years. In the time I worked in the soil and water, the Soil and Water Conservation District office, I can count on one hand, with about 3 fingers left, the number of times I saw somebody in our office who did not look like me. I mean, who looked like me, I'm sorry. Hold on, I need more coffee. Literally, in approximately 21 months of working for the district, I can promise you that no more than 5 people of African descent came into that office. Could it be because African Americans don't do environmental? I know some environmentalists that look like me. Is it because, who knows what it was? But the point is, if in 21 months with me working in that office, 15 hours a week, sometimes 20, and in almost 2 years, I can tell you that I saw less than 5, this many people who look like me in the office, that's a little bit of a problem. Just a little bit. It's not necessarily the organization's problem, but it makes one wonder what can be done to increase its outreach for diversity and inclusion and equity. All right. So what I didn't put on my slide about who I am is, I'm a sociologist and statistician by training. My undergraduate degree from Dominican University, Dominican Rocks, is in sociology, and I specialize in analyzing data. When I graduated from college, I was going to be one of those people who worked on Capitol Hill, who wrote surveys. I was going to write surveys because I love crunching numbers. And one of my mantras is liars figure, figures don't lie. So let's talk some numbers, shall we? Oh, I'm sorry. I can't see that. Sorry. There we are. All right. So some numbers. In 1970, actually, before I do that, when I was going to do some historical research on the soil and water conservation districts, and I couldn't get an exact date of establishment. They said somewhere in the 30s. I was like, great. And then I said, well, me using numbers from the 1930s and 40s is not going to be of any use because hopefully nobody in the room was around in the 1930s and 40s. And if they were, then that's a whole different discussion about historical knowledge that we should have. But in 1970, which is the year that I came into being, let me put it that way, and which was the closest decennial census to the numbers that I could actually use. In 1970, make sure I get this right, 81% of the Commonwealth's population were white. 19% were considered Negro, and about 1% was other. And I mean, when I say other, it's just like they didn't break out anybody at all. It's just black people, white people, black people, everybody else. Fast forward to 2018, which is the latest data that's available from the US Census Bureau. In the Commonwealth, in a 48-year span, 67% of the population classifies themselves as white. 19% classifies themselves as Black or African American. We've changed who we are. 7% classify themselves as Asian, and included in the other 7% is everybody else, which is Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian, Native American, and people who classify themselves as 2 or more races. So that tells us that there have been some great changes in the Commonwealth, and who is and is not shown, and what majorities look like, and how majorities are changing. Because remember, in 1970, 81% of the entire population was white. And in 48 years, that number has dropped by 14%. Now, I just got a little note. Thank you for the note. The Latino people are not classified into white. They are lumped into, other, actually, because most Latinos, they don't classify themselves strictly as Latino. So that's one of those, you can't really figure, they're not listed, and that's the other thing. So, some realizations. Number one, let's be honest, the world has changed in the last 50 years. The customers that you are serving in 2020 are not the same customers that you were serving in 1970. I don't know if anybody in the room has been in the organization since 1970, maybe 1980. The customers of 1980 are not the same customers. The customers of 1990 are not the same customers. The world has changed. However, some of your offices have not changed in 50 years. I say that based on when I go to the Why This, Why Now slide, and I go to the Soil and Water Conservation District's homepage, I don't see, what I see are older white men. That's what I saw. I saw a couple of ladies, but primarily older white men. Excuse me. No. He wants to be on camera. Sorry. And unfortunately, some of our people in the room have the same mindset that we can do the same thing we were doing 50 years ago, and that it's acceptable behavior. I'm gonna get into that in a minute. Many of your offices don't look like the communities that they reflect. They don't. That leads to a hesitancy of coming to ask for help. It really can impact your viability, and in the long run, your existence, because remember that our organization, this organization, is dependent on funding from our local governments. And if your customers don't think that you are viable or that you were there for them, they will vote you out of existence. They will. And just so that we are clear, this is not a liberal or a conservative issue. It's a people issue. But more importantly, it's an environmental issue. Let's be clear. Everybody, well, not everybody, but most people like clean water. Most people want to make sure that their lawns don't erode away during heavy rainstorms. This is not about political ideology. This is about people and our planet and what we can do to help make it sustainable. So, let's chat a little bit. Actually, before I do that, everybody okay? This is my quick check-in. Is everybody okay? Y'all still breathing? I need some people to wave at me a little bit. You know, thank you. I like thumbs up. Excellent. Now I can only see like 3 of you at a time. But if I go back to if this makes you uncomfortable, take a breath, take a break, but come back because I'm gonna need to hear your voice. Okay. So let's talk about my story. As I indicated, and as Chris indicated, I worked for the Soil and Water Conservation District, which means I got to go to some meetings with you all. They're grand events, for the most part. So I list out 3 specific incidents that indicate how the organization's lack of diversity impacts somebody who doesn't look like everybody else in the room. In, I want to say 2016, it had to be early 2017. There was a meeting in Richmond, and it was held at a downtown hotel. Beautiful space. We got there the night before. We went to dinner, had a great time. And the next day, there was a luncheon. actually, I think it was a 3-day meeting, but at least one of this, there was a luncheon. And it was held in the grand ballroom of the hotel. And, you know, it was like plated service. It was fabulous. And because I am a pastor, I had to take a pastoral call. And I got to the luncheon a little bit late. And I was standing in the back of the room, had on pretty much the outfit that I wear corporately, blue button-down shirt, khakis, blazer, $500 briefcase. Oh, and a name tag. That's important. And someone from the organization came up to me as I was standing in the back of the room, because I was waiting for the speaker to take a breath so I could go sit down, came up to me and said, "Excuse me, can you clear my table?" In 2017. Now, let me also say this. I did not look like the wait staff because the wait staff had on black pants, white shirt, black vest. I had on blue button down, some khakis, blazer, $500 briefcase, and a name tag. That looked like every other name tag for the participants at the meeting. The only thing that I had in common with the wait staff was skin tone. I was not a happy camper. Same meeting. There was a luncheon. Again, I'm a pastor, and when my members call, I have to take the call. So I got to the second luncheon a little late, and my seat that had been paid for was given to someone else who had not paid for a seat. And I was told that I just had to suck it up and deal with it by the host of said luncheon. Let's just say that there was a Starbucks in the hotel, and I was glad there was a Starbucks in the hotel because I was able to mete out my frustrations on how I'd been treated. An employee of the organization felt like I was being mistreated, and I was. I was meeting in Natural Bridge. Now, Natural Bridge was a bit of a drive. Went to the meeting. I got there. And again, I was treated as if I was a member of the Natural Bridge staff as opposed to being a guest and an employee of the district. I'm not getting good, warm feelings about this at this point. And so then I get to talk about Graves Mountain. And let's just say that for a boy who grew up in Georgia and Southeast DC, to drive to Syria, Virginia, and pass stars and bars and lawn jockeys is not a comfortable feeling at all. I see some faces that look really disturbed. I was really disturbed. But it is what it is. Now, this just does not happen in this organization. I am a pastor. I am an ordained pastor in the United Church of Christ. I am known as an interim ministry specialist. I go in, I help churches prepare for their next pastor and help them clean up whatever messes they've got from the previous pastor. So I get to go in and do troubleshooting work. I'm good at what I do. I love what I do. I get excited to do what I do. And we had an annual meeting in Baltimore. And this was the meeting that just could not go right. And I was starting to wonder, was I a member of the Addams family? Because it was like, do I have this cloud over my head? You know, am I walking bad luck? What? I go to this meeting and I have a problem with my lodging. Fine, I get through that. And so while I'm trying to process that problem, I am sitting at a table in the lobby in a suit. My brother-in-law, who is an ordained pastor as well, is with me in a suit. We are sitting there, we're having our cocktail hour, we've grown, and this woman walks up to me and says, I need you to carry my bags. I ignored her. because it was either that or it was not going to be a nice meeting. We were getting a cart, and lady walks up to us and like, excuse me, I need this cart. And she proceeds to start taking my stuff off of this cart. I'm at this point angry and frustrated because I know what this is about, because in my denomination, people who look like me only comprise about 7% of the clergy. But it happens in the church as well. But the most egregious one was a woman of about 68 years old who I know. And in an effort to make a joke, I don't know what she was thinking. She is trying to park. She's driving down the street, and she rolls down her window and yells out her window, "Hey, can you park my car, boy?" Mara, that's exactly the face I made. These are the things that happen to people of color that make them hesitant to participate in organizations where they don't see people who look like them. I have been in office spaces where there have been some completely inappropriate jokes told, jokes that had they been told in any other setting would have gotten the person fired on the spot. But in this organization, because the majority of the people look alike and they kind of have the same humor, it's okay. It's not okay. A funny before we go on. Kendall, Tyree, and I had. I think we have a wonderful working relationship, and so we were talking last week about how this is going to go, and she sent me an email. She was like, "Yes, we look forward to this December 15th." And I was like, "Woohoo! December? I get an extra 3 months. I'm gonna dance like Elaine." And she got excited because that was I used a cultural touchstone that she understood. Let me say this. I have to work in milieus like that, and I have to do that in order for people to understand, because had I said, she understood who Elaine was. And she was like, and yes, for the Seinfeld reference. And I'm thinking to myself, I have never watched an episode of Seinfeld. I only know that because it's, you see it in a meme. Had I said I'm dancing like George Jefferson, it probably would not have worked. She wouldn't have understood. I'm not going to say she wouldn't have. More than likely, I'm going to say she might not have understood the reference. So it behooves us to start thinking outside of our individual boxes and start thinking about people holistically. But remember this, at the end of the day, this is not a liberal or a conservative issue. This ain't about liberal, this ain't about conservative, this ain't about black, this ain't about white, this ain't about purple, this ain't about green. This is a people issue. But more importantly, it's an environmental issue. We all use soil, we all use water, and we all benefit from good conservation and good stewardship. So I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you this question, then I'm going to give you a chance to think about it while we take, because I'm going to ask this question, we're going to, just trust me on this. How does this impact the work you do? How can a failure to realize differences impact the efficacy of the organizational mission? Number one. And number two, does it impact the efficacy? I think I said we were going to build in a 10-minute break at this point. So I need you all, we've been at this for now 30 minutes. I need you to take a 10-minute break. So I need you to come back at 10:25. Think about that question. And when you come back, we'll talk, okay? Are we good? Thumbs up. I'll see you in 10. Well, if you're going to use it, don't use a bootleg version. Use the original. All right. Are we all back? I'm back. All right, where's my host? Where's my host? Where's my host?
You're here.
Okay.
You're ready.
Okay, I wasn't sure. Let me see. I'm trying. So this is, so let me also apologize. So I do my best work live with people. So doing this is a stretch for me, and it doesn't feel as natural as I really wanted to be. So if I feel like if I seem like I'm a little halting, it's because I'm trying to make sure that the production value looks amazing and that I am hitting my points, but I can't read your faces because I can only see 3 faces at a time. Like right now I see Kathleen. Hey, Kathleen, wave at me. There you go. So I'm a little out of my element, even though for the last 6 months, I've done all my sermons via video, but I'm also standing up and I'm doing, that's a totally different animal. But all right, so we're back. Now, before we get started, so I've got to make a public apology because when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And I like to own my wrongness when I'm wrong. I made an assumption about Kendall. And, you know, Kendall's like, I would have gotten a reference. I'm like, okay, thank you. You know, the reason why I use that as an example is because after 99 times of using an example and people don't get it, you tend to, Guy Johnson tends to go back to the default and tries to make sure I use a cultural touchstone that the person I'm talking to will be familiar with. So that was my go-to. So Kendall, thank you for the grace that you exhibited in that. Terry, I will come watch the Jeffersons with you anytime, and you too, Kendall. But that's the reason I used that particular example because I knew in my heart of hearts that if, so can I just be like transparent for like 30 seconds? Is that okay? Somebody, I need nod, yes, no. Oh, thank you. I got a thumbs up. Okay. When talking to a white woman of a certain age who grew up and became a young adult in the time of Seinfeld, I knew that she would understand it. To that point, after I did that, I did a quick poll on Facebook because I do a lot of stuff on Facebook, and I asked the question, quick poll. Do you like Seinfeld? Yes or no? And how do you identify yourself racially? And people did not follow directions. They did not follow directions at all. But those who did, it was interesting. It was a 50-50 split. People who identified as white were like, love Seinfeld, not even that. About 85% of white people who responded in the way that I asked them to were like, oh my God, yes, love Seinfeld. 50% were like, oh my God, it was horrible. On the flip side, 85% of black people were like, oh my God, it was horrible. 15% were like, yes, I loved it. So even with that, you know, you can't necessarily make, you can't make assumptions that you think you can. And in doing this work, you know, every now and then I kind of drop the ball. So I dropped the ball on that one. So Kendall, thank you so much for for the grace that you just exhibited in this.
My main point was really, I want you to be comfortable using the Jefferson reference. And how do we get to be that climate where that's fine? I would have caught it, but if not, it was an opportunity I want you to educate me on.
Okay, so the reason why, what I did not, again, another thing I did not disclose is I'm in an interracial marriage. So my husband is an old white guy. And we have these conversations about Black and African-American cultural touchstones. And he'll say, I've never heard of that. And I'll say, it's Black famous. So one of the best examples of that is like the Time Life CD series, the 70s. Now, he knows Evelyn Champagne King because he loves her song Shame. And I think whoever the male host was, I want to say it is Gerald Albright, not Gerald Albright, Gerald whomever from the Manhattans. And, you know, and I'm like, how do you know that song? Let's just kiss and say goodbye. And he's like, oh yeah, but that's the only song I know by them. Are they Black famous? I'm like, yes, baby, they Black famous. So when you are in the minority, people don't necessarily think that it is their responsibility to learn about cultural issues that don't directly impact them. Does that make sense? If it makes, so hold on, I gotta swipe screens. If it makes sense, somebody nod. If not, tell me. If it doesn't make sense, put it in the chat box and I can see it, and I'll see if I can explain it a little better. But primarily, again, it's one of those, the dominant culture many times does not feel like it has a responsibility to learn about any minority cultures outside of food. Perfect example. So you all know I'm a pastor, and as a pastor, especially in the denomination where I serve, the United Church of Christ, we are pretty progressive, and we like to be multicultural. And one of the things that you learn in seminary is that they like to incorporate other cultural worship experiences into worship, especially in seminary chapel. So what generally happens is in chapel, they'll say, okay, we're going to do this service and we're going to do a prayer from the New Zealand prayer book, and we're going to do a hymn from South Africa. And they try to make it this multicultural thing. And a lot of times when it's not a multicultural group, they ask the question, why do we have to do that? So it then becomes, okay, now I got to educate you on why we're doing this, because, you know, and then they say stuff like, oh, well, we're introducing a Black hymn into worship. And it's like, no, it's not a Black hymn, it's church music. All church music is church music. It just happens to be used more in this setting. So that's one of I hope I'm explaining it right, because because I'm kind of doing this one on the fly. I'm trying to figure out the best way to make that understood. Hold on a second. Marie, thank you for this question. I am not necessarily referring to things that are culturally appropriated. That's a different conversation. So for those of you who don't know what cultural appropriation is, it's when, I'll use this example. It's when Kendall Jenner, sorry, Kendall, that was the first name that came out. And she's young enough that this will make sense. When Kendall Jenner decides to tie her hair up in what are defined as Bantu knots, and magazine, I'll use Cosmo. And Cosmo says, oh my God, Kendall's new hairstyle is the in thing for blah, 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 blah. And it's like, baby, Bantu knots have been around in Africa and amongst the Bantu people for the last 2,000 years. And when it is then defined as this whole new thing that the culture, or that this particular person who is of the dominant culture has introduced, and it's now the new thing, that's cultural appropriation. So that's a different conversation than cultural touchstones, if that makes sense. And thank you, Mariah, for sending out the link that shows what I'm actually talking about. And again, if you go to the Bantu tribes in Africa, you will see women who have been, again, wearing their hair like that for centuries. But because a cultural, what do they call it? I'm having a brain fart this morning. I am so sorry. Influencer, because a cultural influencer has said, this is the new thing and we should do. It's like, no, boo-boo, we've been doing that. You know, people who look like me been doing that for years and years and years and years and years. Maria, I'm sorry. And so please excuse me, Maria, for butchering your name. I grew up in the 70s. Hooked on Phonics works for me. So I phonetically tried to pronounce your name. Thank you for the grace that you just extended. So now that I hope that kind of made sense. If it doesn't, we can re-examine that. Thank you again for the grace, Maria. So the thing is, and I can see the chat messages as well, and because I'm squirrel, I will laugh accordingly. But I asked a question before we went on break. How can failure to realize differences impact the efficacy of the organizational mission, and does it impact the efficacy? So we got about 3 minutes. So I need for whomever is monitoring, if you, whichever one of the hosts can see everybody, if they raise, somebody like raises their hand, they want to answer the question, let me know who it is. Call them by name and let me know who it is. Okay, go. Or not. By the way, this is your learning. I get to facilitate it. You only get out of it what you put into it. And so if I don't hear any questions, I'm going to assume that I am brilliant, which I am. I'm going to assume that I am brilliant and that everybody understands what I am saying, and we're going to move on. So last chance for
it might be easier to see folks if we take off the screen of the PowerPoint, and then we can just have our full screen with people's video images.
I'm not going to see that. Because I'm on my phone, I'm only going to see 3 people at a time, including myself. So, if the host can take, like I said, one of you can do that. And I just saw a note that said, okay, Kathleen S., go.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So if we don't recognize cultural diversity, then we actually can't conserve soil and water, because soil and water, or conservation of all natural resources, is for everyone. And if we don't understand how to reach out to all of our citizens, then our work is not complete. So we have to make a concerted outreach effort to make sure that we are reaching all of our citizens in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so that's why it's so important. And sometimes you have to have a staff person or a volunteer that looks different than your staff that can help you do outreach, because this, unfortunately, is not a diverse organization of soil and water conservation districts, not just in the state of Virginia, but in the nation.
That part right there.
Yes, it's all over. It's not just here, and I'm not saying that it's something that is done on purpose. I've been here almost 23 years, so you can imagine you're a new guy, but I've been here a long time. And normally, it's just me in the room that looks like me, especially when it comes to being a district manager and an education coordinator. So it's difficult, but my district is really good. We actually have an African-American chairman as well. So we're very different, and I think we're making a huge impact in our watershed because of the outreach efforts. And of course, Corey is our conservation specialist and he's awesome. So yeah, so I think it's so important to have that. And not just for African Americans, for whatever group it is.
Exactly.
It's just not us.
So I'm going to interrupt. Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask a
Welcome.
question. You said something very important. You said our chairman is minority. How
Yes.
many districts can say, other than yours, they have a minority person on their board in the Commonwealth? That's a question. You know, you said, you know, we all need clean water. We all need to conserve soil. But why, you know, why is it that out of how many districts are there? 1, 2, 3. How many districts are there in the state?
47.
47. Out of 47 districts, 4. So far out of 47 districts, 5. Am I going to get to 20%? No.
And my chairman is not an extension agent. So I'm going to put that out there too. I'm gonna
Right.
put that out there. He's appointed
Exactly.
at large as a farmer. He's not an extension agent. So I know a lot of African-American directors are extension agents, but he is a appointee at large producer. So my board consciously went out and tried to make sure they had an African-American director.
Okay. So 6. All right. So listen, out of 47 districts so far, I've got 6 districts that have said we have someone who is not white on our board. Now, remember I told y'all I like to, excuse me for a moment. Get out. I talk to him like he's a child because he is. You gotta go. So let's see, 47, so that's 10. So we're looking at about 14% of the districts having a minority on their board.
And can I ask a question real quick? Out of those minorities, how many are extension agents?
Let's not worry about that. Because
the reason I'm asking that is because we have to appoint an extension agent. So I'm saying, like, the directors that have actually put their names on the ballots, was elected, or a board went out and actually tried to find a minority director versus that you have to put a director on because they just happen to be your extension agent.
Okay.
That's what I was just curious about, Guy.
Okay. Sorry, I'm locking my coworker out because he doesn't know how to behave. So we got at least 1, 2. So at least 2 people are saying that their minority board member is not. You know, so it becomes how do we get past this? How do we? I'm sorry, I keep talking about we, because now I've incorporated myself back to y'all. How do y'all get past this? Well, we'll talk about some of those. We should get to some of that a little later on. Can we go to the next slide after take a break? Okay. All right. I love this slide. It is the same distance. But when we start talking about issues of diversity and inclusion and equity, a lot of times we don't think about other things that can be in the way. I hope everybody has seen this cartoon at least once. Nod, yes, no, I don't know, I'm in around. I'm okay. So I got at least one yes, yeah. So, and I mean, let's look at it. This is a real-time scenario. You know, yes, they both have to run 40 yards. But look at what, what the young woman has to do as opposed to the gentleman. So keep that in mind for a minute. Just keep that in the back of your brain. All right, let's keep going. Let's keep talking. Words are my currency. I make my money by talking. Because words are my currency, I think that if I'm gonna use some terms, you need to know what terms I'm going to use, and we'll get into what they mean as we go along. Okay? So, and these are some of my favorite words on earth these days. Diversity, equity, inclusion. Wow, that's why we're here. Intersectionality, which is very important. Privilege, sexism, and racism. Now, I'm gonna tell you that those last three cause people a whole lot of problems. And they get heartburn, and they get mad, and they go, that's not me. And it's not you personally. It is not you personally. Hear me clearly. It is not you personally. Everybody mouth, it is not me personally. Thank you, people who follow directions. Thank you, Lori. It's systemic. We are talking about systemic changes that need to be made. And those systemic changes that need to be made often bleed over into this organization, our organizations, whether it be Soil and Water, whether it be the United Church of Christ, whether it be the Loudoun County School District, whatever it may be, those systemic issues bleed into everything we do, and we now have to talk about them. Let's get started. First up, diversity. So diversity, according to the Queensborough Community College of the City Colleges of New York, this is what they say. The understanding that each individual is unique and recognizing our individual differences. These differences can be along dimensions of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, physical abilities, religious beliefs, political beliefs, or other ideologies. It extends to understanding each other and moving beyond simple tolerance to embracing and celebrating the rich dimensions of these differences of each individual. I'm going to make a public declaration, and about 3 people are going to go, oh my God, I didn't know. I'm a gay man. Proud gay man, out gay man, woo! Flag waving, not parade marching. I'll wave a flag, I'll write a check, but I'm a gay man. I'm married. I've been married to my husband for 15 plus years. And what happens is people say things like, well, we can tolerate that. And my response oftentimes is not charitable. I have a colorful, I use colorful language every now and then. Yes, Pastor Guy, the Reverend Guy Sebastian Johnson has a colorful vocabulary. Especially when people say things like, we can tolerate that. True story. I love true stories because number 1, they're about me. Number 2, generally they're hilarious. So back in 2015, and I think Chris may remember this, before I actually became a full-time pastor, I was being, my resume was being sent out to congregations, small congregations who needed a pastor. In the United Church of Christ, which is where I serve, a lot of our churches don't have more than 25 members, and they're these little, small, old churches where they're happy to get somebody to come in and preach for them, and they can't afford to pay them good money, but they need a pastor, and I needed to be trained as a pastor. Because as a theologian, I got that, but the actual work about being a pastor. So I live in Loudoun County, Virginia, and because of where I live, I am assigned to the Shenandoah Conference of the United Church of Christ, the Shenandoah Association, of the Central Atlantic Conference of the United Church of Christ. And so the Shenandoah Association stretches from actually Clark County down to Stanton, to Charlottesville and back up. So it's this triangle along I-81. So my then church boss said, listen, I'm gonna send your resume out because we're gonna get you a church. I was like, yes. So she sent it to a church, and the first church comes back and says, listen, we're not quite ready for a Black pastor. I said, oh, okay. So, I was a little upset and sat on the sofa and, said some not so charitable things because my feelings were hurt. So her name is Marie. Marie said, don't worry, I'm going to send you to a second church. I was like, yes. So she sent my resume to the second church and they said, listen, we're not quite ready for a gay pastor. I was like, okay, for real. Let's, all right, fine. And so she said, okay, don't give up. Don't be discouraged. I got one more. We're going to try this again. And then I was like, fine. So she sent it to the third church. And this is where intersectionality comes in. And I'm going to talk about it a little more in a couple slides. But this church said, we can deal with Black. We can tolerate gay, but not at the same time. So I sat on my sofa and I ate a bucket of fried chicken and I cried for 3 days. And poor Bob was like, okay, you're perfect. You're good at what you do. They don't deserve you. Fine. And while the denomination is inclusive, and while the denomination on the whole loves diversity, celebrates diversity, champions diversity, marches for diversity, the people, not so much. So to show you how things work out, I was like, you know what? None of these churches deserve me. So fast forward 4 months, I ended up at my first church, which was this little country church in Carroll County, Maryland. And I was like, y'all know I'm Black. And they were like, yeah. I'm like, y'all know I'm gay. They were like, yeah, we love you. Come be our pastor. Okay. That's celebrating diversity. These people didn't agree with me on anything politically. They didn't agree with me on 70% of stuff socially. But they were willing to expand their horizon. That's what diversity is about, expanding your horizon. Equity. Equity is the state quality of or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. As opposed to equity in your house, and we are grateful that real estate values are going back up. Yay, real estate. But let's talk about being fair. And of course, I have a cartoon for that. Equality versus equity. With equality, everybody gets the same box. Everybody's standing in the same box. Everybody, nobody's box is bigger than the other. Versus equity, where the boxes are adjusted so that everyone can see. This is where I pause and ask if there are any questions, especially right here. Equity is about leveling the playing field. No one has an advantage. Now, if this were true equity, the fence would come down, but that's a whole nother set of issues. But for right now, this is what equity should look like. Questions? Comments? Concerns? Issues? Who's giving them the boxes? The box people, I don't know. I guess that's an excellent question. It's a question that's never come up, but the boxes are necessary. I've seen people comment on this photo saying they should have paid to see the game. Well, then that goes into what happens when you can't afford to pay for it. You don't get to go? Thank you, Hannah, for that. What does height represent? Everybody's not the same height. That's what I would go with. Now, when we talk, so I'm glad someone said, they should have, the important thing to note is that one person loses a box. Yes, but in losing his box, he could still see. if that makes sense. And with equity, everybody is involved. Everybody is willing to work together. As Kathy said, the people in the picture came up with their own solution. The gentleman who does not have the box can still see. So also, this is important. When talking about equity and equality, people think that because they give up something that they're losing everything. This is not a pie. It's more than enough to go around. But if we're going to be a just society, we've got to have a level playing field. Equality is everybody can buy a house. Equity is no redlining. Equality is everybody can come to the luncheon. Equity is the Black person in the room is not assumed to be the server. And a lot of times people who have power get nervous when people say, okay, can you cede 5% of your power? And it's like, they act like the world is ending. And while I'm on that subject, equity for some people feel like losing. But if we're going to reach everybody, everybody's got to give up a little something. So for example, with in this cartoon, the shortest person is already at a disadvantage. Giving him a box so he can see the game does not hurt anybody. The gentleman who gave his box to the shorter person has not lost a single solitary thing. He can still see the game. So equity is about fairness. Separate but equal is equality. Equity is all schools are funded. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, somebody tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. Good move. It feels like, yes, it feels like losing to those who have more than they need or can afford to do without. I often use the example, I love life isn't fair. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna pause. What about when people say that life isn't fair? Life is not fair. But it really is not fair when the deck is stacked against people who don't have anything. What's not fair is one person, so since we're talking about soil and water, what's not fair is bottling water in the Amazon and then creating a drought. That's not fair. Life is not fair, but we can equal the playing field. And a lot of times people who say life is not fair are people who are in positions where they have more than they need. Does that make sense? Close that down. So just so you know, I'm switching back and forth between screens. So I'm still learning this thing. So, but I think we're doing okay. All right. Inclusion. Being included. Yeah. It's more than just numbers. It really means feeling like you are empowered to be there. So I go back to my experience with soil and water. I never felt like I fit in. I never felt like I fit in. Okay, before I go on, I'm gonna pause. What happens when there aren't enough boxes for everyone to be able to see? How do we decide who gets the box and who gets to see this game? How can we pursue equity relative to given resources without excluding someone who needs to see the game? So when there aren't enough boxes to see, then you tear down the fence. We don't decide who gets the box and who gets to see the game. Notice one of the things we said was the group decided amongst themselves how to do that. If if we want to reach everybody, we have to think up ways to include everybody. And no one is being excluded from seeing this game based on that picture. Let's be honest. Before it became an equity issue, the person who, even though they all had a box, one person still could not see. I always go back to schools. In 1954, the Supreme Court overturned the separate but equal doctrine that came from the Dred Scott case. Now, schools were separate, but not equal. That was an equity issue. And we have to start thinking about other people. No matter what your religious stripe is, Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, Hindu, Muslim, flying spaghetti monster. Most belief systems have as one of their tenets, do unto others as you would have do unto you. Be good to other people like you would be good to you. Be nice to your neighbor so your neighbor will be nice to you. Clean up your dog's poop so that other dogs don't poop in your yard. That was personal. You have to think outside of yourself. And you have to do that in the workplace as well. And so many times, part of the problem is we don't want to give up our own private fiefdoms. We don't want to give up whatever power we think we've amassed. We don't want somebody new coming in here telling us what to do. Anybody heard that before? We don't do it that way. That becomes a question of equity. You know, I told you all I'm an interim ministry specialist. I get paid to come into churches and say, hey, fix that, do that, blah, 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 blah. I get paid to do that. Now, what'll kill an organization is we've always done it that way. That will kill an organization. Whether it's a company, Plessy v. Ferguson, my bad, Alan. Dred Scott was slavery. That's how it's always been. We've always done it that way. We don't like people like that. Alan, thank you for the correction again. So that will kill an organization. Partially because we think we know what's best and we've done it this way forever and ever and ever and a day. Partially because we don't want to see power, partially because we're afraid of change. How many of you have been around long enough to remember when personal computers were introduced into a workplace? How many of you remember that about half of the staff that had been there since the 70s fought it tooth and nail? I worked in the federal government, my first job out of high school. And Windows was the big thing, and people were losing their minds because it was this computer thing, and we had to know how to program, and we had to use DOS, and you got disks that are this big and this big and this big, and which disk, and we are afraid of change, and change is what stymies our organization. The lack of change stymies our organizations. And diversity, equity, and inclusion work is about change. That's the definition of madness. If you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always got. So when you're ready for something different, you change. So back to inclusion. So I've made friends in this organization. I got some people who I would love to socialize with outside of the workplace. I made some friends. But for the whole, I never fit in. I never fit in. And it became obvious when there would be meetings, because I come from a corporate culture. And the culture that I'm used to doesn't necessarily work with the culture I was being introduced to. Now a lot of that is me. I'm gonna own that because I'm a city kid. City kid. You know, if I had my way, I'd be living in Northwest DC right now on the 16th floor of some apartment building with a balcony overlooking the National Cathedral and Rock Creek Park and Poppins acting crazy. I'm a city kid. So me living out here in the real suburbs, almost exurbs, my family is still trying to figure that out. But inclusion means making people feel welcome. A lot of times I never felt welcome. That's a hard truth to say. And for some of you, that's a hard truth to hear. Intersectionality. This is one of my favorite words of all time. So Kimberly Williams Crenshaw developed this term in 1989. I got to meet her. She has this brain that makes my brain hurt thinking about how she thinks. Intersectionality is the framework for understanding how aspects of a person's social and political identities combine to create unique modes of discrimination and of privilege. It identifies advantages and disadvantages that are felt by people due to a combination of factors. So, to explain intersectionality, we're also going to talk about privilege at the same time. Privilege is a special advantage or entitlement used to one's own benefit or to the detriment of others. These groups can be advantaged based on social class, height, age, intellectual ability, disability, ethnic or racial category, gender identity, sexual orientation, and religion. So privilege and intersectionality go hand in hand. Now, I'm gonna say something that's gonna upset somebody. And you're gonna be okay. You're gonna breathe through it. You can go take a break and tell me I don't know what I'm talking about. But white privilege is a real thing. It is. White male privilege is a real thing. In this society, white privilege kind of dominates everything. I'm also going to tell another truth. Everybody has some sort of privilege. Now, what does that mean? I'm glad you asked. So, I started my career, my professional career in government. I was a government secretary. Now, in 1989, most secretaries, gender-wise, were anybody, mouth it, women. So I come into this organization, I type 65 words a minute because my mama said if you can type and answer a phone, you'll always have a job. So I needed a job, so I typed and answered phones. And yes, Karen, exactly. So here I come and the secretarial pool looks at me like, what you doing here? And I'm like, I got a job. And they're like, well, can you handle the job? And I was like, I guess we'll find out. And it took me 6 months to get my first promotion because I was able to do the job. But know that the cards were stacked against me. Now, remember I said I got some privilege? I do have some privileges. I have an education privilege. I have a master's degree and I'm currently enrolled in a doctoral program. I've been to law school. So I've got some educational privilege. I've got social class privilege. My husband and I are solidly middle class. We live in Leesburg, Virginia. We are solidly middle class. We're dinks, double income, no kids, with opposable thumbs. That's privilege. My quote lifestyle gives me that privilege. Again, I go back to true stories. So I went to the Lancaster Theological Seminary. which is a very progressive seminary, but it also admits everybody. And so we get some people who, on the theological scale, are a little more conservative than I am. And so we're sitting in a group session, and his name is Terry Freeman. Terry, I have Terry's permission to tell this story. Terry says during this group meeting, there were 7 of us in the group, and he says, you know, your lifestyle makes me uncomfortable. I said, my lifestyle? What you mean my lifestyle? I was like, do you mean the fact that I cut my grass on Tuesday and that I do my laundry on Thursday and that I have a subscription to the Kennedy Center, and after we go to the Kennedy Center, we go to a 5-star restaurant because we can afford to? Is that the lifestyle you're talking about? And in that moment, I played 3 very distinct privilege cards. We all got some sort of privilege. It's a matter of how you use it that makes a difference. Now, I just told you, I played 3 very distinct privilege cards on Terry in a row. Boom, boom, boom. I was on fire that day. It was a Tuesday. Fast forward 6 months. Terry's house burned down. To the ground. Boom. And we get this notice through the seminary, you know, Terry's house is burned down. What can we do to help? I called my husband. I was like, listen, Terry's house burned down. How much money can I give him to help him get restarted? And he gave me an amount. I wrote a check. I was able to use my privilege for good. Privilege is not a bad thing. It's how you use it. Chris Van Vleck uses his privilege on my behalf every time we go anywhere socially. I never worry about getting pulled over when I'm with Chris Van Vleck. I also don't speed, but I make sure if I'm in the car with him, I don't worry. If I'm in the car with my husband, I don't worry. True story. I love true stories. On January the 16th, 2015, I got pulled over in Walkersville, Maryland. I got pulled over because I was speeding. I had just left a church meeting, my pastor, white male, in the car with me, and I get pulled over, and Rob sees me go on autopilot. I go to 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. I left the window down. I put my hands out the window and say, I go through the litany. Kathleen, you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? All right. And so my pastor, who was in the passenger seat, doesn't know what's going on. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, listen, I'm getting pulled over. This is what I got to do to make sure we get up out of this alive. At least I get up out of this alive. And so as I'm doing this, Rob looks at him, he's like, is your sergeant so-and-so and such a person? And the guy's like, yeah. My pastor says, I'm Dr. Rob Apgar Taylor. I'm the pastor of Grace Church in downtown Frederick. I'm also a police chaplain. Why are you stopping him? Because, well, he was speeding. Well, he was speeding, but he really wasn't speeding. Can we let this go? Cop says, have a nice day, and we drive off. That could have been in so many other ways. True story. Fast forward about 18 months, I am driving from my first church, which was in Carroll County, to my second church, which was in Frederick County, and I was on the telephone. And in Maryland, you cannot hold your phone in your hand and talk. So I get pulled over, and it's an icy Sunday morning, and I'm like, oh crap, I've gotten pulled over. And so cop comes up and he runs my license and says, listen, we got a problem. And I'm like, what do you mean we got a problem? He said, your license is suspended. I was like, well, what do you mean my license is suspended? He says, well, according to the state of Maryland, your license has been suspended since 1993. This is 2017, y'all. And I'm like, my license can't be suspended. I have a valid driver's license in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I have good car insurance. My car insurance is cheap because I'm old now. What do you mean? He was like, well, your driving privileges in Maryland are suspended. So I can't let you drive anymore. Somebody has to come and get your car and drive you where you need to go. I'm 50 miles from home. But I happened to be at the convenience store around the corner from my church where they all know me. I go in the store and I'm like, John, listen, I need a favor. This is gonna sound crazy as hell. I need you to drive me across the county line. Because it was a county cop. I was like, I just need you to drive me across the county line. When we get about a half mile in, have somebody follow us, they'll drive you back. My license is suspended, I can't drive. And so they know John because John owns the convenience store. John uses his friend. He's like, hey, Joey, I'm gonna drive it. It's all good. Drives me drives me a mile and a half down the road, has followed, come back. Privilege and intersectionality. When you can have privilege, but it's what you do with it that makes the difference. Does that make sense? All right, so we talked about privilege, we talked about intersectionality, racism. So before I say anything else, I'm gonna say this. There is no such thing as reverse racism. Hear me clearly. There is no such thing as reverse racism. I'm gonna put a pause there because there are two things I want to address really quickly. Health privilege is real, Stephanie. You can look at this virus and be able to know how unlikely you are to die from it. Or you can look at this virus and know how likely you might be to die from it. And Alan, yes, most people understand privilege as something given or received, not based on any effort by the person who has it. How do you discuss something like education as a privilege with someone who put themselves through school? It is a privilege, Alan, because even though it's not that you put yourself through school, it's that you have gone above and beyond. And let's talk about what educational privilege looks like. I went to Oxon Hill High School, Oxon Hill, Maryland, home of the Clippers. Many of you, if you're familiar with Northern Virginia, you all know it now as National Harbor. Oxon Hill, Maryland, where I graduated from high school, 1989. Clippers rock. And in our high school, we were a science and technology center. There were two in Prince George's County, one at our school, one at Eleanor Roosevelt in Greenbelt. Now, of the science tech kids, because that was a busing program, that's a whole nother set of issues, but of the science and tech kids, 100% of them went to college or university. Some of them, you've seen a couple of my classmates on TV and in movies and on The Bold and Beautiful. I'm very proud of him, by the way, and I'm very proud of her. But of the neighborhood the kids for whom it was a neighborhood school, we had about a 62% college rate. Now, you don't necessarily, privilege is not something you have to necessarily work for. And I'm not saying that, how do I do this? Yes, you may have worked your way through school. I don't deny that. And nobody is saying that you have not had a rough time with that. But in doing that, it was not as difficult for some people as it was for others. Individual stories don't disprove a thing. Remember I said I felt unwelcome? Well, other Black people may feel welcome in Soil and Water. I said it wasn't for me. That doesn't mean that it's not a welcoming place. It was not a welcoming place for me. Individual stories don't disprove something. To say that, there is no such thing as white privilege because I had to work hard, nobody gave me anything. White skin gives you privilege. Oh God, what is his name? There's a political scientist, lives in Arizona. I can't think of his name at this point. But he one time said, my white skin gives me privilege. White skin and red hair. And not thinking his name right now. But it's one of those things that has stuck with me. Just because there is an exception to the rule does not disprove the rule. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, somebody tell me. I don't know what I'm talking about. Very good. So, back to racism. There's no such thing as reverse racism because racism is systemic. And I always use this as an example. We own a house in Loudoun County, Virginia. And I know that we are blessed to own a house in Loudoun County, Virginia. And I know that when my husband went to buy, when my husband bought our house, it helped that he was a white male. It helped that he was a white male, because white men, for every dollar that white men make, black men make 72 cents on that dollar. I know that we were blessed when my husband bought this house because we weren't given a higher interest rate based on skin color. I know we were blessed when we bought this house, especially when my husband bought this house, because we weren't redlined. Those are systemic issues. If I go to buy a house, there's more likely than not a chance that I'm going to either get a higher interest rate than my husband, even though we make about the same amount of money and have about the same credit score. I might have issues with redlining. If I don't use the right real estate agent, they're not going to show me houses in some place that I can necessarily afford. Those are systemic issues. So what is redlining? Corey, thank you for that question. Redlining. So back right after World War II, the federal government, which is in charge of like federal housing lending, would take a map and they would find minority neighborhoods and they would draw a red line around it, making it less than desirable for loans. Literally a red line. And that didn't just extend to loans, it extended to insurance, it extended to grocery stores, it extended to public services. And that red line determined who was there and who was not. That red line also helped determine how, for example, highways were built. I like using Washington, D.C. as an example. Interstate 95 was supposed to go straight through Washington, D.C. And some people with some money were able to get it diverted and it only stayed on the outskirts. But in cities like Philadelphia, in cities like Minneapolis especially, Minneapolis was carved up in a way that highways went straight through minority communities, dividing them in half and making them less than desirable. And redlining still is an impact in 2020, whether we want to admit it or not. Richmond has redlining. I know that Richmond had redlining issues as well. So it's a thing. I've had a varied career over the last I've been working 31 years, Jesus. Over the last 31 years, and I worked in insurance for a while. And I've seen the maps where they say, in this area, insurance rates are going to be higher. Okay? It's called low income area now. Not necessarily. I lived in Chicago, and in Chicago, there is a section of town called Pill Hill. It's on the south side of Chicago, southeast side of Chicago. It's between Cottage Grove Avenue and Stony Island Avenue. Yes, it's called Pill Hill because a majority of the people who live there are middle-class Black people who who work in the medical profession. Pill Hill is redlined. Beverly Hills, which is a mile west of there. Average house price is about 400 grand. Redlined. So it's not about low income necessarily. It's about who is there. Now, racism is systemic. Racism is systemic. Hear me clearly. Racism is systemic. Racism is different than discrimination. Yes. Oh, Maria, thank you. On an environmental note, most factory and trash businesses in Richmond are based in historically redlined areas, causing health and environmental issues for those communities. I love it when you are responsible for your own learning. That is so true. Gary, Indiana. I'm familiar with Gary, Indiana. It is a horrible place. There are two cities in the country that I've been to that are permanently gray. Detroit and Gary, Indiana. Gary, Indiana has a EPA Superfund site about a mile from a place where I went to every week for the better part of 10 years. What is also in Gary, Indiana? Poor Black people. The entire city of Gary is redlined. So you got poor people, you got minorities, dump it in their neighborhood. They can't complain. That's problematic. That's environmental racism. So the difference between racism and discrimination is racism is systemic, discrimination is personal. I don't like you, and I might not treat you fairly, but that's not going to... Chris, can I pick on you for a minute? I need a verbal yes. Okay, absolutely. Thank you. I love Chris Van Black. Y'all know he's a good friend of mine. I love Chris Van Black. And Chris Van Black get on my nerves. And about 3 days a year, I can't stand him. And I don't give him, I grilled ribs and I don't give him ribs. And I don't give him ribs because he got mutton chops and he lives in the country and he don't have a good DSL. I don't like him. That does not stop him from getting a job. That does not stop him from getting a loan. That does not stop anything in his world, me not liking him. I may not like him, but everybody else does. I'm discriminatory against him, that's one thing. But I don't hold any power over his life. Chris, on the other hand, I know Chris's father. And Chris's father is a pretty influential man. And if his father decides one day that he had a bug up his butt about me, there are some things that he has access to some people who could do me harm, who could make sure I don't get along, who can make sure that my life is not good. Discrimination, I don't like you. Racism, the system doesn't like you. That's the difference. And I tell people there is no such thing as reverse racism because let's tell some truths here. How many Black folk do you know own a bank? How many Black-owned banks are in this country? The power is one directional. That's a good way to put it. Out of all the banks in this country, there might be 50 Black-owned or minority-owned banks in the nation. And by the way, I use Chris and his father as an example. His father's a good dude. He is not a politician. He's just a regular old dude that I get to play golf with like every now and then. I just use him as an example because, and I'm saying this and I'm saying it in love, it's not being discriminatory. I used him as the old white dude example because that's kind of how it goes. Because I mean, remember, it's about power. And the power dynamic is not equal. That's why I say reverse racism is not a thing. It's not a real thing. Finally, sexism. The prejudiced belief that one sex should be valued over another. I'm gonna make a public admission. I had to make this admission yesterday, and I'm making it again today. I can be sexist sometimes. My privilege as a man sometimes extends into how I treat women. I don't mean for it to, and it's not that I'm treating them badly, but I treat them as if they can't take care of themselves. Y'all know I'm ordained in the United Church of Christ. I'm also a mentor for up and coming pastors because I went through the system and they know, and you know, anybody who knows me knows if you got a question, call me, I will stop and help you out, blah, blah, blah. So one of my mentees she was ecclesiastically hazed yesterday. And she called me and she was just upset and shaking and crying. And I was like, okay, do I need to go handle some business? Because you done upset one of my babies and you can't upset my babies. I went into Papa Bear mode yesterday. I was ready to go fight for my kid. And my pastor, the one who got me out of the speeding ticket, I called him, I was like, do you know what they did? And I'm in Papa Bear mode. I'm getting ready to go handle it. Brown bear, handle it. And my pastor said, number one, calm down. Number two, she's a grown woman. She can fight her own battle. That's not your battle to fight. And she fought that battle well. She handled it. So stand down. Brown bear, stand down. And in that moment, I was like, oh crap, I am treating this seminary trained professional woman as if she is my 16-year-old daughter who needs dad to come in, ride in and save the day. Sexism 101. Didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. So I had to call and I was like, listen, I am so sorry. I forgot that you were a woman and I was ready to come in. And she was like, I know you were doing it out of love, but I am a grown woman. I can handle it. So, okay, fine. So even I have moments when I get it wrong. And I consider myself to be pretty adept at these things. All right. So I've been answering the chat box questions as we've gone along. So what I want to do is take a 5-minute break, come back, and we're going to do a modified version of the exercise I wanted to do had we been live. Does that sound good? All right, it's 11:31 by my clock, so let's meet back here at 11:37. Ready, go. Or Chris redirects it and says, I didn't ask you that question, ask her. She, and that scenario just doesn't happen with, in work situations. I love true stories because A, they're about me, B, they're hilarious. In 1997, in February of 1997, I was going to buy my first new car. I was 26 years old. I was actually 25. So we need to rely on the men to address it. The person indicated that if they addressed it, it would be rude. So what I'm saying is the person with the privilege used the privilege. Before I tell the car story, my husband is an older white male, and we come from very, very divergent backgrounds. He is from Philadelphia, German, Nordic people. I'm from Georgia, Southern, African-American people. There are times when we are either in one setting or another setting. And if we are in his family setting, up until about 3 years ago, there were 2 African-American men because his sister married a black man too. That's a after hours story. But now that Walter has gone on to his greater reward, it's just me. And there will be times when I attempt to say something and I'm overtalked. And Bob will say, wait a minute, guy's speaking. He learned that lesson from his mother. I miss my mother-in-law. And because I worked in social services, I have a background with Medicare and Medicaid, and she had gotten a notice. And Bob's older brother, who I adore, but he don't know jack about Medicare or Medicaid, is huffing and puffing. And so I said, Roz, can I see the notice? And I look at the notice. Oh, it means blah, 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 blah. And as I'm talking, Richard overtalks me. And Roz said, Richard, shut up. He's talking. She used her privilege as his mother to intercede on my behalf. So it's not, so in this case, yes, the man needs to intercede because he is the one with the privilege. And, you know, I'm not saying that women should be these demure sitting in the back creatures, but the original poster said, if I address it, it will be seen as rude. Now, if you don't care about being seen as rude, that's one thing. But if that's important to you, then let the person with the privilege help you. Let that privilege be used for good. Okay, car story. So, 1997, I'm going to buy a new car. I'm 25, 26 years old. I go to Al Piemonte Ford in Melrose Park, Illinois. Now, before I tell this, when you have a good experience, you tell 3 people. When you have a bad experience, you tell everybody. So every time I do a training, especially if it's customer service related, I talk about this. And this is privilege at work. So at 25 years old, I looked like I was about 19. It was about half the size I am now. Looked tiny thing. And I was with a gentleman who literally was 3 times my size. So I weighed about 125, he weighed about 375. And because I had never bought a car before, I was like, I need you to go help me buy this car because I don't know what I'm doing. So he goes, and because it was my first credit purchase, I was having trouble getting financing. And so we go to Al Piemonte, and I wanted a Ford Ranger pickup truck. I don't know why, but I wanted a Ford Ranger pickup truck, 1997, and it was powder blue, well, not powder blue, but blue, and so I would have had this pickup truck. What I'm gonna do with a pickup truck, I don't know. I am not a pickup truck kind of dude. So the guy's like, yeah, we're having problems finding financing. And so I looked at the salesman and I said, and Alan, Alan, I'm going to use you as the example because you are next to me on the screen. I said, Alan, have we examined every financial institution that we can? And Alan, as the salesperson, looked at the gentleman with me and said, yes, we have, sir. And blah, 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 blah. And so the gentleman I was with, he grabbed his head and he went, oh, Lord, because he knew it was about to be a problem. And I said, sir, listen to me and listen to me clearly. He's not buying the truck. I am. This $2,000 in cash, my money, not his. So if you're going to talk to me, if you want to talk to anybody about buying this vehicle, it's me. But now you've ruined that. Let's go. And we walked out, went to the Honda dealership around the corner from the house, walked in and said, Alan, listen, I just left Al Piemonte Ford. I went to go buy a truck, and the salesman didn't seem to understand that I was buying it. He was talking to the dude here, and if I'm buying this vehicle, you need to talk to me. Salesman said, Mr. Johnson, it would be my pleasure to sell you a car. What do you want? I said, well, this is what I want. This is how much money I got, and this is how much I want to spend. I walked out of the dealership with a car an hour and a half later. Use your privilege for good. And that means that sometimes the person who has something in common with the person that is being discriminatory speaks up on their behalf. Not that the man is being the great savior or the white knight, but using his privilege in order to help remedy a situation, especially when it's a professional situation. Can you imagine how much different our workplaces would be if when these issues happened, the person with privilege said, wait a minute, what about so-and-so? How much different would our workplaces, how much more could we get done? What would our efficiency look like if we included everybody in the conversation? Oh no, Chris left. I can't pick on him because he's not here. So that is why you use your privilege, because it helps everybody. Imagine what we could do if we did that. Is using your male privilege to defend a female sexism. I didn't say anything about defend. This is not about defending anybody. This is about ensuring that all voices are heard. This is not about defend, because professional women don't need defending. Again, I yesterday, Papa Bear, go handle it. She's got it. She's a grown woman. She doesn't need defending, but there might be a time when I have to use my privilege in order to help make this thing go better. Not about defending, it's about including. And there's the difference. But yes, using your male privilege to defend a woman can be seen as sexist. It is. Okay, so this is where we are going to see just how good my vision for making this thing a reality really is. If initially when I put this presentation together, when I put this proposal together, actually, we were going to be in the same place and we were going to do an exercise where we were all linked hands and but we can't do that because COVID-19. Yeah. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to ask a question and I'm going to let you go into a breakout room. You're going to be there for, did I say 2 or 3 minutes, y'all? I think it's 3. Did I say 3? 3 minutes, yes. We're going to go into a room for 3 minutes, and thank you for that, John. We're going to go into a breakout room for 3 minutes. Y'all are going to discuss this, and we're going to bring you back. We're going to discuss it for about 2 minutes, and we're going to repeat that about 5 times. And let's hope this works. So y'all are my guinea pigs today, and if it works, great. If not, I got to go back to the drawing board. All right. So first question. I can get my hair cut in any salon. Breakout rooms for 3 minutes and then come back, go. Jesus. All right. Has it been 3 minutes?
Not yet. Still working on them.
Okay.
It's supposed to come back.
Actually, accidentally left my room too early, you all.
Yeah, we got the notice to leave, so we said, oh, it must be time to leave, and we clicked.
So it works. All right, is everybody back? We're gonna go ahead as if they are. So I can get my haircut in any salon. Talk. Raise a hand. Oh, like I can see it. Unmute yourself. Anybody?
We said that we could get our hair cut anywhere, but it might not look like we wanted it to.
Okay.
I was in her group. I was in Karen's group, and that's what we talked about, like really honesty. Like I can walk into any salon and get my hair cut, but do I want to? And I have gone into salons, you know, and I told her I lived overseas for 3 years in Italy, so I had to go to salons that were white, and they did a wonderful job on my hair actually. But you know, if I've gone into white salons and I've asked, hey, you know, can you cut my hair? And they're honest, and they're like, yeah, we can cut it. It might not look like you want it to look.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's like, thank you and bye.
So I actually have asked that. I've asked that question because up until I basically shaved my head, I had hair for a long time, and I would, you know, especially living where I live, there is a dearth of salons and barbershops that know how to cut minority hair, and honestly, unless you're getting a military haircut, there's a difference. So the fact that, you know, you can say I can go to any place and get my hair cut, that's a blessing in itself. Next question. I can easily find hair care products, skin care products, and Band-Aids to suit my skin tone and hair. Breakout rooms, 3 minutes and go. Oh.
Tell Garnosh to go.
Yeah, you don't have to go to one. Oh, I think he went.
Oh well.
Okay. All right, we should all be back. Okay. So what went on in your breakout rooms? Anybody?
An interesting point made where sometimes you think on the spectrum of darker for, let's say, matching band-aids, but we also had makeup come up in the sense of lighter skin tones are also harder to match as well as darker. So there's just seems to be like 4 or 5 options and they're all Caucasian, but they're not always fair enough and they're not always dark enough.
Funny you mentioned that. So one of the things that we don't talk about is with film. So back in the days before we had these digital cameras, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we had this stuff called film, and we had this company called Eastman Kodak. And Eastman Kodak developed this skin tone guide for which the film developing brain fart guide thing, how it should be done, and what skin tones look like. I've told you all that I'm married to a white man. We went to Stockholm for vacation. That's privilege. I'm gonna own that. And so we go to Stockholm, and my husband says, "I want to go to the ice bar," and I was like, "Yes!" So we go to the Absolute Ice Bar. Fabulous. It's in the basement of this building, and everything is made of ice. Everything. And we decide we're going to take some pictures in the ice bar. Now, that turned out not to be such a good idea because my husband is very, very fair. I am not very, very fair. It's a dark room. And so when we take the picture in this dark room, you see him wonderfully. Me, all you see are eyes and teeth. It's that kind of thing. When we take pictures, either he's going to be washed out or I'm not going to appear. So we have to, so it's balancing, it's striking that balance. Also, ladies will understand this. I've got 4 sisters. So as being 4 sisters, 2 boys, it a lot of times was my job to go and get fill in the blank. So flesh-colored pantyhose was always a thing. Because whose flesh? Because flesh-colored pantyhose for someone of my complexion, not going to be flesh-colored pantyhose for, for Marie. I'm using you because you're on my screen. So, so we have to keep those kinds of things in mind. What is considered flesh tone? So it's a real thing. Next one. I have never been asked if I was the secretary, maid, housekeeper, janitor, or some other subordinate job when I was the boss, hotel guest, or homeowner. Before we go, I've told you what happened to me in Richmond. But also, I was standing outside of my house about 6 months ago, and someone driving through our neighborhood asked me if I did yard work. Y'all look at me. Do I look like I do yard work? Anybody, do I look like I do yard work? No, I pay somebody to do that. I was so offended, but then I was like, you know what? That's his ignorance. Moving on. So breakout rooms and go. And so one of the things I'm going to finish the statement. That's the whole respectability conversation. That's a whole different conversation, Kermit, that we can have offline. But let's talk about that. Anybody, we had a really robust conversation in our breakout room. I'd like to hear what other people had to say. Hello.
We had age come up, being perceived as younger and therefore not as knowledgeable or not as professional. And then we also had gender come up, where we're perceived as secretaries if a farmer walks into the office and we're the only ones there. And they're like they're only comfortable giving away a message instead of talking to you. If you could very well help them, but they don't want to talk to you. They want to talk to Farmer Joe's, technician or whatever.
Right. The other thing that's important that I love someone said was, it's about the tone of the ask, whether it was inquiring or demanding. That's very important, because how you ask the question makes a big difference on the response you get. All righty, so next slide. I have never had to wonder, was I hired to meet an affirmative action goal? Whew. Breakout room, go. Baby, you can't mute me. All right, are we back? We're back. Let's talk about this real quick. So just so you know, in our room, I said, Alan, because Alan was in my room, I said, Alan, can I assume? And he was like, yeah, you can assume that. So Alan doesn't have to worry about that. Anybody else ever had to worry about that?
It was brought up changing or leaving out parts of your full name on a resume because it might influence getting passed on or passed over. That was brought up in our conversation.
I was in that group with Marie. I think Willie and I both, because my middle name is Naima, so it's Kathleen Naima Sullivan, and I think Willie has, I can't pronounce what was it, Willie?
I don't blame you. My full name is Wilfred Kwesi Wood, the Kwesi being the African identity in my name. And there was a time when I applied for a position, I would take off the Kwesi just so it doesn't stand out as a sore thumb and miss that for the values that I present to the organization. So I go with Wilfred Wood. And if and when I get the position, I say, by the way, that name is Wilfred Kwesi Wood.
Let's see. And the fact that we have to leave out, quote, ethnic sounding names in order to even be considered, it's problematic. I love my parents. They gave me the whitest name they could, Guy Sebastian. That does not sound like a black dude from Southeast DC. It doesn't. So, but I have a friend, I have friends who are, first generation to this country, and they have changed their names so that they can get jobs. That's untenable. That's horrible to even think about. All right, so last one. Ancestors were never forced to leave ancestral lands. All right, go. And we're back. So our conversation in my room was a little more dynamic than I thought it would be. This is what I get for making assumptions. But let's talk real quick. Anybody?
I can go, if that's all right.
Yes.
So not my ancestors. My ancestors were in a decent position, but my parents, my brother and I, we had to flee our country. So we left everything behind and we couldn't even tell people we were going because otherwise we would get stopped.
And that's a story that many because you said something earlier, you know, about learning English. That's a story that many of us who are native born don't know. I know that I don't know where I am from historically. I just know that my folks had, you know, come from slaves. That I know. Anybody else?
I made a point. My grandparents came through Ellis Island, and I told my group, my grandfather was promised to my grandmother's sister, or my grandmother's sister was promised to my grandfather, and she died. And so, my great grandparents owed a debt to his family. So he got my grandmother, who was 12 when she was forced to leave Italy because he was coming to the U.S. My grandfather was 32, she was 12, and so she was forced to leave Italy and come to the United States. So,
Wow.
and it was apparently a very miserable existence in 1920.
I'm sure it
and
was.
in my group too. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Of course, I hate to say of course, but my ancestors were forced, of course, in enslavement. And I was telling the group I do ancestry a lot, and through my DNA. So I found where a lot of my family was from. And, you know, we had a conversation in our group where we were talking about how, you know, some people immigrated to the United States, whether that was from poverty and other issues. And, you know, it was kind of like, you know, there was kind of like a choice where, of course, we didn't have a choice. As Africans, we were enslaved and brought over here as well. And then we also talked about Native Americans, because that's in my ancestry as well. And I think the other person in the group had Native American in them as well. And they was talking about that being forced from the land, those people as well.
And what's interesting is this is not just a people of African descent issue. Scotsmen, Irishmen, Australians. So that puts us more in common with each other that a whole lot of times we want to really own up to. All right, so we are going to plow through because we have 8 minutes left, and I'm going to be cognizant of your time. So now what? I need you to remember a couple things. All citizens, everybody, they are your customers, no matter whether they're internal or external. Everybody is your customer. specifically because of the type of work that you do. Please remember that everybody has something to contribute to your mission. We all need clean water. We all want to conserve the soil. You know, we all have a vested interest in this. So everybody has something to contribute to your mission. Now, you may need to educate them on what they can contribute, but everybody has something to contribute. Remember this. Oh, I skipped a slide. Sorry, I'll come back to that. Remember that all people must feel welcome and included. Otherwise, your mission is compromised. If everybody doesn't feel welcome, they're not going to buy into what you're doing. Excuse me. This is not about you personally. This ain't about you. I love saying that. This is not about you. This is systemic. It's about a system and how it is set up. It becomes our responsibility, those of us who know that there is a system and knowing how it is set up, to help dismantle it where it needs to be dismantled. There is such a thing called privilege. It is. We all have some sort of privilege. True, we've had some substantial social change around privilege issues, but some of the systemic issues and effects of exclusion still impact generations down the line. Environmental racism impacts people many generations after it's done. A lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion has a cumulative effect. Intersectionality is important here. People of color don't just have one opportunity denied. Women don't experience just one incident of harassment. I'm pretty sure that I can ask that of all the women on this call, if I asked you, have you ever been harassed by a man, you would laugh at me and say, more than once. Not that it's funny, but the fact that I would be so naive as to think that women aren't routinely harassed. Finally, the playing field is not level. Let's own that. It may look level to you if you are in a position of privilege and power, but honestly, the playing field is not level. Race, class, gender, other unknown variables still have continued significant influence on people's access to opportunity. Redlining still exists. Environmental racism still exists. Sexism is still a real thing. Class warfare is a real thing. Now, so let me say this. I am not making any statements about political systems, about a political system. But what I am saying is we all have privilege, and especially in the world, in this world, we are of a certain class. And honestly, our classism can be problematic at times. Or better yet, my classism can be problematic at times. I did talk about all citizens are your customers, all people have something to contribute, everybody must feel welcome and excluded. Closing questions. It is 12:27. I have done a good job. I've kept us on time. Are there any questions for me? If not, so where do we go from here? You keep doing the work. This is not the only conversation that you need to have about this. There need to be more conversations about what does privilege look like, okay? One thought on privilege is that it allows folks to make mistakes and suffer setbacks and still move forward. For some folks, one bad decision is the end, whereas others can make multiple bad decisions and still move ahead. That's a whole nother workshop, and that is so true. That is a privilege, that is a a byproduct of privilege. You get to make mistakes and they're not held against you. Where a 32-year-old man can still be considered a boy, but a 32-year-old white male is considered a boy, but a 16-year-old black male is a grown man. That's a privilege issue. What are some ways we can focus on making people feel welcome? You just do. Invite them into the conversation. Make yourself more approachable. You can do that. There's not, for me, I just tell people, just do it. Let's see, are there trainings available to help us learn how to market, reach out, and include? Yes, there are. Google will bless your life, but also if you will contact me, and my contact information is going to be on the next slide, I will be more than happy to point you in the direction where you can get the trainings that will help you with that. How can white people with privilege interrupt racist comments, behaviors in all white spaces? Call it out. When people do it, you call it out. And you say, and you might lose a friend behind that, but you call it out. And a lot of times when you call it out, the response will be, it was just a joke. Wasn't funny. Famous last words from Guy. How can we better reach out to minority landowners without making it feel like we are, quote, targeting them? Again, you just do it. And you say, one of the things we want to make sure we do is we want to make sure that everyone is heard from. We want to make sure that everyone feels included. That's what I would do. Let's see. Can the VACDEDEI, oh, it is okay to target. Yes, it is. Can the VACDEDEI committee help with some additional training ideas, opportunities, or resources from Guy or others? So the DEI committee, y'all talk about that. Kendall has a question for you. So it is 12:30. I hope that I was able to help you in some small way. It has been my pleasure to be with you this morning. Thank you for letting me experiment on you on how we do this, on how I do this. Make sure that this is not your last conversation, but the first of many, because we have work to do. Because remember, we all have a vested interest in having clean water and conserving our soil. My contact information is here. You can reach me at my website is www.guysjohnson.com. And if you want to send me an email, you can email me at pastorguy@guysjohnson.com. Again, thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to talk to you for a couple hours. Thank you.